This content is brought to you by Uphold, which makes crypto investing easy. I've been a user of Uphold since 2017. They're one of my go-to exchanges. You can buy, sell, and trade cryptocurrencies on Uphold. You can also trade precious metals and equities. They have 10 plus million users, 250 plus cryptocurrencies, and they're available in 150 countries. As with all exchanges, you can buy and sell on them, but I highly recommend you custody your own crypto, not your keys, not your coins. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is James Seyffart, who's an ETF Research Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. James, great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
James, I saw a tweet from you showing that the percentage increase of the chances of an approval of a Bitcoin Spot ETF has been increased by you and the folks at Bloomberg. And I was like, I got to get you on here to talk about it because everybody's waiting in anticipation for a Spot ETF approval. But before we get there, tell us about yourself, where you're from, where'd you grow up, and your professional background.
Yeah, so I'm a New Jersey native, born and raised all the way through. I went to college at the College of New Jersey, studied finance and accounting, and started working at Bloomberg right out of school. Ironically, I'm not in New Jersey on the East Coast right now. I'm actually in St. Louis, which we were just talking about beforehand, but visiting my girlfriend who's out here for residency. Started at Bloomberg right out of school. I had done some internships at hedge funds, so did a lot of stuff with funds data, so ETFs, hedge funds, mutual funds, that type of stuff. And Eric Balchunas, who's my current boss, I did a lot of work for him when I was in Bloomberg's data department. And he had written books on ETFs, and they brought him over to Bloomberg Intelligence, which is Bloomberg's research arm. So when I joined him in Bloomberg Intelligence, I was split between two people. I was working with Eric on the ETF and fund side, and Mike McGlone on the commodity side. And right after I joined, Mike McGlone decided he was interested. He's like, "Do you know anything about cryptos?" And I was like, "Do I?" I've spent a lot of my personal time researching this. So I helped bring Mike McGlone up. So we cover cryptos from like a strategic and commodities global macro perspective on his side. We also have a crypto analyst who does bottoms up, like on-chain type analysis, things like that of the major cryptos and digital assets, however you want to describe it. So we have a whole team of people that do this type of stuff. So naturally, I actually, when I eventually got promoted to a full-time analyst, I went to the ETF side because that's really where my expertise was, not commodities. But I do specifically cover our commodities ETFs, and obviously because of that, I've sit squarely in like the two diagrams of my area of expertise and interest is ETFs and funds and crypto and commodities and alternative assets. So these crypto funds, these Bitcoin applications, the Ethereum futures applications sit like right in my the overlapping part of my diagram essentially.
That's awesome. So your personal journey in discovering crypto, one of the folks asked you, do you know anything about crypto? What was your first encounter and what was your aha moment?
Yeah, so as like most people, my first encounter was not my aha moment. So my freshman year in college, so this would have been spring of 2014, I had a suite mate who was like telling me, now I know it was Bitcoin. I didn't understand what he was saying. I don't remember him saying that, but he was interested in looking at the Silk Road, talking about this decentralized thing, like talking about mining, and I let him download the Bitcoin miner software. I was like, yeah, fine, you can use my computer and put it on my laptop and you can get some of these free like magic coins. Like, I don't care. Ultimately, that laptop completely crashed. The hard drive completely malfunctioned, and I actually lost like a 10-page paper. So for years, my association with crypto and Bitcoin was like it ruined my computer. There's no way. Like, I don't know for sure that that's what happened, but like in my mind, like the timing was like too overlapping for that not to have been part of the cause. But yeah, so basically this guy who I reached out. So in 2016, the next step was when I really got reintroduced to it. Cathie Wood, who we work with a lot, runs ARK Investment Management. She's like known for her ETFs. She was one of the first people. I think she was the first public fund to invest in crypto in some way when she bought GBTC in like 2015, 2016. And I was actually at like a traditional finance conference, and she was up on stage, and she spent the entire time on stage just talking about Bitcoin. They wrote a Bitcoin like not the white paper, but their own white paper about why they thought it was beneficial, where it could go. And that's when I really got hooked. So that was like the fall of 2016. So I opened my first Coinbase and crypto Gemini accounts actually around that time. So that's when I first started diving in and really learning about it. And obviously, like a few months later, things kind of went crazy. And actually in late 2017, when things were really at their heyday, we were actually writing it was a bubble. Mike McGlone was getting ripped apart for saying it was a bubble at the time by crypto Twitter, as you can imagine. He's now a crypto bull, if you will, but he was very adamant calling it a bubble at the time. I reached out to Mike, the guy that put the software on my laptop, and he never responded to me, and ultimately deleted any trace of himself on the internet. So he's either I'm hoping he just like has like a crypto multimillionaire or however much, but who knows? I'm assuming most likely he probably had his money on Silk Road if he did, and it's long gone, or Mount Gox. The odds of him actually having it somewhere, but who knows? I've never been able to get in touch with him, and anyone I've asked that also used to know him hasn't heard or seen from him since college.
Well, hopefully, to your point, it's not the latter; it's the former. Of he became a
and
multimillionaire.
actually, I just realized I said 2014. I graduated in 2014, so it was spring of 2011.
Wow.
So it was even way earlier than that. But yes, the point still remains the same.
Oh yeah, I mean, so you could be considered a crypto OG, man. I mean,
I had no interest. I thought it was fake. I didn't. Yeah, like most people, you read about the first time, you're like, this is ridiculous. And then like you really come back. And for the most part, anyone who's really dived in, I feel like everyone I talked to is like, they heard about it, thought it was BS, and came back to it. And we're like, actually, this might have something to it. So
for sure. So James, you have this experience of looking at TradFi and ETFs and how things have progressed there, and how that market is set up for different types of ETFs. What was your first impression or thought when you heard BlackRock is applying for a Bitcoin Spot ETF?
Very good question. So before that, we were officially at like 1% odds. I was probably like closer to 10% odds that we got an ETF this year, because I thought like there was always a chance that Congress would do something. Like it wasn't zero, but we were pretty low. ARK was the only active application. Cathie Wood's company, ARK, was partnered with 21 Shares, which is an ETF issuer. They have the most crypto ETFs anywhere in the world as an issuer. They're mostly in Europe. They're almost all in Europe. So we just thought the odds were pretty slim. We were waiting on the Grayscale case. We were very bullish on the Grayscale case, which we can get into in a little bit. But basically, we came out early right after oral arguments in March and said that we had a 70% chance of a Grayscale approval. So those odds had gone up a bit, but we still expected the SEC to basically, we thought Grayscale would win, but the SEC would still come back and deny for different reasons. That was our base case until BlackRock filed. And then all of a sudden everything changes, because we weren't shocked that BlackRock was interested in launching a Bitcoin ETF, right? You asked me at any point, I would have said if any of the big issuers are going to launch a Bitcoin ETF, it's going to be BlackRock, right? It could be potential for growth. It's just something they would do. They have gold ETFs. They will take a shot at anything. What was surprising is that they would take a shot at going first and trying to fight this regulatory battle. So the fact that somebody like BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, came in and they had this language with the surveillance sharing agreement. At the time, they didn't name the exchange. We all assumed it was Coinbase, but at the time they didn't say Coinbase. They had the surveillance sharing agreement, which we get into the nuances of how much that actually matters. But there was a lot of things that all of a sudden the calculus changed, and we basically, within a couple of days of that, upped our odds to 50% just from talking to other people. We saw a lot of other people applying. So for a long time, right after that BlackRock news, we were around 50-50 before we thought whether or not we thought these would get approved. And then, as you mentioned, we recently just upped our odds on the Spot Bitcoin ETF to 65. And I want to be clear, this is not like quantitative or like we're not measuring all these different things. It's like we have a team of people and we're all arguing and debating about what facts matter and trying to read the tea leaves. It's really like a little crazy, but it's like we kind of figure out like, if the odds were here, would you still bet on it, like on either side? So we're trying to figure out that and try to figure out like where we actually think the odds are. So yeah, that's how it works. And I'll just stop there. You can ask whatever else you're.
So do you
want to hear?
No, that's great insight. And I love it. That's, when I follow you and Eric as well, you guys provide insightful information about what's happening. And, do you think we've hit a tipping point with institutional adoption of Bitcoin and crypto? Because as soon as BlackRock filed, the whole herd of Wall Street started lining up. Everybody started filing for a spot ETF and also following BlackRock's lead. You mentioned Coinbase being named as the surveillance partner, the structure, the feedback from the SEC. Do you think we've hit that tipping point that now it's like everybody's going to be participating in this?
So what I will say is like there really aren't any new filers. Like all of these guys, the only new filer here is BlackRock. Wow. Every single other person that's filed here has already filed in the past. So this isn't like brand new institutional adoption. This is institutions that have people at these firms. I often hear all these people about like institutions don't understand it, but like people don't grasp it. Like it's a big company. Like Bloomberg for the longest time, we were covering crypto. I believed in some of the things that the crypto ecosystem and Bitcoin itself was trying to do, but like Bloomberg as a company was against it, right? It's top down, but that doesn't mean that like these companies, these people at these companies, there's people within them that don't believe in it. So obviously BlackRock has people like that. Invesco, Wisdom Tree, Bitwise is basically solely based on crypto asset management. There's all these different firms out there that like, even if the whole firm isn't behind it, there's likely people that have personal interest or think there's a room for growth there. I forget exactly where I was going there, but it's not that this is a herd of institutions. The one thing I will say as far as the institution goes, if the SEC does approve this, right, it's not so much that, oh my God, billions and billions of dollars are going to flow into this and it's going to pump my bags. It's more to me, specifically this, and we can talk about ETH futures ETFs too. It's like, this is more of signaling from the SEC that like, they're kind of changing their tune a little bit. You're getting a little bit more regulatory clarity. Not enough in my opinion, but you're getting a little bit more reasonable clarity. I guess the clarity right now is nothing is allowed, but that seems to be something is changing on the back end here. And I don't know how much of it is because BlackRock and Larry Fink are involved. These lawsuits that have been half losses or full losses at the SEC. Basically, the way I looked at it was like, until BlackRock got involved, the SEC kind of viewed Bitcoin as like this tier or pedestal all off on its own. And then all these altcoins were on the opposite side. And then Ethereum and some other ones were kind of in this middle ground where like they wouldn't say it's a commodity. They're not also claiming it's a security. So like they might be like kind of my assumption is now is that Ethereum is kind of being pushed closer to Bitcoin, but not fully. So we're just kind of trying to read all these tea leaves. What are people saying? What is the SEC doing? We have sources at these companies about like what back channeling might be happening from the SEC. So we're just trying to put all that together to figure out what's happening. So it's really just us live, like seeing everything we can and knowing how these regulatory bodies work, knowing how these issuers think, and knowing how the process works to try and figure out like what could be happening here.
So James, are you hearing of anything related to Goldman Sachs and some of the investment banks who may want to also throw in an application as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of people talking about these other names that could throw in. Honestly, I don't think anyone else is really going to throw in. It's only going to be the asset managers for the most part that have already done this, these ETF issuers, because even as it is right now, we have like 10 applications. Global X just refiled. So Global X had filed in the past. They filed last week. So they upped it. So it's 9 active applications. And then if you include the Grayscale lawsuit, which we also consider to be active, that's 10 different issuers looking to launch a spot Bitcoin ETF. And while ETFs are kind of like a winner take all, it's more like a winner take most. I'll take that quote from Matt Hogan, who's one of the head of research at Bitwise Asset Management. It's like there's not room for 10 spot Bitcoin ETFs, right? Like most likely, that theoretically maybe there could be if there's really a lot of interest, but time will tell, right? So I don't think anyone else is going to come into the space. Like there's too many people have too much of a lead. There's a lot of things you need to set up on the back end with third-party custodians.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Administrators working with the market makers and the traders and the authorized participants that will make these things work. Like it's not like Goldman can just spin this up in a day and get it launched out. So yeah, I would say any rumors about other people entering that haven't already filed, I'm not sure I buy that. But it wouldn't be impossible. I just think it's going to be very hard, especially if either the SEC is going to approve these ones that have already filed in order with the way they filed, or they're going to approve them all at once. And either way, if they approve them all in order, you're way late to the game unless you're going to offer some ridiculously low price or some really unique thing that like people are going to want. you're not going to be able to stand out. And if it's all at once, you like if you're a Goldman, like why would you ever do that, right?
Sure. So you mentioned, possibly a scenario is that all of these ETFs get approved at once. It seems like the SEC is under pressure because of the backdrop of regulatory, issues that are happening, regulations and bills that are in process. The Ripple situation, Grayscale seeming like they're going to win this. What does your gut tell you is the likely scenario to play out, that all of them get approved? And are you thinking Q4 of this year, or this is something that spills into next year?
Good question. So I'll split that up into two answers. The first answer is we think multiple will be approved at once. I've written research where I basically said, like, we expect it to be all of them at once, but that's like just like our base case. I do think if they are approved, there will be multiple approved, not necessarily all of them, but theoretically the easiest way to do this is just be like, here, all 10 of you have at it, right? That's the path of least resistance, particularly if the SEC loses their lawsuit against Grayscale, which we're waiting on a decision. So one, I think multiple will launch at once, maybe all will launch at once, but time will tell. Standards and precedent says that that's not going to be the case. They'll just launch like one after the other in the order that they were filed, potentially. I don't think that'll happen either. The SEC is very cognizant. They got critiqued hard for launching BITO, which is the futures, Bitcoin futures ETF first, and it basically they played a kingmaker role. They let BITO launch first, and they won in the entire. They have like 94% of the assets and 98% of the trading volume. I mean, it's become it's the dominant choice, right? So I think the SEC is cognizant of that and doesn't want to go down that route again. As far as timeline goes, obviously the SEC, like everyone talks about all these timelines. I have all these deadlines that are important to me. I like to watch them, but at the end of the day, the SEC can kind of do whatever the hell they want, which I feel like is kind of getting overlooked. Like I've been saying this from the get-go. Like everyone's like, oh, they can't do this, they can't do that. I mean, what it comes down to is like what Gary Gensler and the people he reports to, so namely Democrats in Congress or like just the White House in a way, like they'll make their decisions and the SEC staff and lawyers will back into those decisions with legal reasoning. That's what they've done. They've done that in the past. They did it when they approved one of the Bitcoin futures ETF approvals. So they have no problem doing that, right? So that's the one thing on timeline. Like they could approve them all next week. Like that's not like that wouldn't be like illegal or anything, right? So, but my main timelines are I initially, if you had asked me a month ago or 2 months ago when the Grayscale. When the BlackRock application happened, I thought they would approve these things before the Grayscale decision comes down, and that way they could basically say, "Who cares what the courts say? We actually were right, and we wanted the surveillance share agreement or whatever." I'm not sure that's going to happen anymore. I'm more in the camp now where I think the SEC is going to wait for a Grayscale decision because you have BlackRock on one end, you have a Grayscale potential loss on the other end, and the SEC is really kind of backed into a corner, particularly in these spot Bitcoin ETFs. So then I think they might approve. So the two dates that I'm really watching are one, if my theory is correct, it'll be some time period after the Grayscale decision comes down, which could come down any day now. Our expectation will be before September 30th. My guess was August 15th, like a month and a half ago. So that's still on the table. It'd be great if that was a complete other, like just educated guess. So like don't take any credence to that. But the real date that we're looking at would be like something like 45 to plus days after that decision comes down that the SEC would do something. So technically the DC Court of Appeals, it's a panel of 3 judges. They will make a decision in the Grayscale case. And then the SEC, theoretically, if they lose, will have 45 days to request what's called like an en banc hearing, which basically means like rather than just the 3 judges that are on the panel, it'll be all the judges that are on that DC circuit. So it'd be like however many judges would look at the merits of the case and decide like if it was like dealt with correctly. We're not so it's unlikely the SEC would do that, but I guess time will tell. So then we could be waiting even longer if they do go down that route. But if they don't, then you have like 45-ish days at least, maybe more, before the SEC will have to do something. So we'll be completely dependent on exactly what the judge's ruling says. So it's like,
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
the Grayscale could win, but it's going to really come down to what the wording in that lawsuit is.
Um, I'm
Oh,
still
sorry. That was the one date. So like the one date is like we get the ruling, and then there's some timeline where the SEC has to respond. The other date, the next one is the ARC 21 shares. I said they were the only one that was active when BlackRock filed. Their first final deadline, absolute last case, last ditch effort where the SEC has to approve or deny is January 10th. So if we get to January 10th and the SEC denies ARC and 21 shares, their application, I can't imagine them approving the other ones that are due in March, right? So if that gets denied, then it's all gone. We're not getting a spot Bitcoin ETF that year.
I'm still of the mindset, and I know this is not tangible or anything, that optics, and the optics don't look good for Gary Gensler right now. And especially if BlackRock is here, PayPal's launching a stable coin, the narrative has shifted on him. So I feel like there's pressure on him, but I could be absolutely wrong. That's just,
Yeah,
hearsay.
we agree with you completely. Like we've been saying from the get-go, the reason that Eric and I picked up so many followers is because we were the ones saying the spot Bitcoin ETF was going to get approved, and we weren't like crypto analysts like it's going to get approved, right? So
Right.
so BTC futures. So that was in 2021, and one of the reasons we were so bullish on that was because Gary Gensler gave a speech on August 3rd of 2021 saying like we look forward to applications, which doesn't sound like much, but it's similar to what they did with the futures ETFs recently. And really what it comes down to is what Gary wants to do. So it's become, as you said, the words we've used is politically untenable. It's becoming to a point where like Gary needs to spin this as a win.
Right.
And if he's taken losses, he's a political animal. He wants to be Treasury Secretary, no matter, he's a very political minded person, right? So if he can spin this and say, look, we got Coinbase to come in with a surveillance sharing agreement, bring them under our jurisdiction in some way to do X, Y, and Z. We've cleaned up crypto a bit more. All of a sudden, him approving these doesn't look like a loss or him losing to Grayscale. It looks like he won. And like in my mind, that's the route that I would go down if I were him, unless there's some other thing going on. So I completely agree with you. It's getting to a point where he kind of has to shift gears a little bit. I think, like I hinted at earlier, he's going to shift gears on Bitcoin and Ethereum because he has said from the get-go, Bitcoin is the one thing he will say is not a security, right? He's going to shift and let kind of Bitcoin and Ethereum be their own thing and then really go after everything else. And we'll see how that goes. Obviously, it didn't go great with Ripple. And if you ask me, I would have said Ripple, if anything is a security, Ripple's about as close as it gets. Like a lot of the other cryptos have less security-like characteristics than Ripple does. So
And so with regards to the Coinbase item that you mentioned, with the fact that the SEC is suing them, do you think that throws a monkey wrench in anything? Or is it, like you said, Bitcoin is clearly, they've said, is not a security, so it doesn't matter about the altcoins. That lawsuit is happening because of the altcoins. But the Bitcoin situation and from a custody standpoint, that doesn't matter or affect the ETF process.
yeah, so all the denials back to the Winklevoss trying to get this through with their Gemini trust, have said that they want a surveillance sharing agreement with a regulated market of significant size. And those are very specific words because that's what the SEC continues to use. There's a whole bunch of other reasons why they denied them over the time, but like that has been there the whole time. And that's really the one thing we're focused on here. They want either a regulated market underneath somebody's like the SEC or CFTC, which is why they approved the futures, because the CME market is under the CFTC. It's a regulator. So they've always said they wanted this, right? The question is like, there's no definition of what a regulated market is. Like you kind of know it when you see it, really. And there's no definition of really what a market of significant size is. And the SEC has shown their willingness to completely finagle on those matters, right? So I mentioned the CME ones. They basically approved the CME futures the CME futures ETFs for Bitcoin, saying that they were regulated markets of significant size because it's CME, regulated by the CFTC, and it's a market of significant size because it's the only market in the US. So like it's a market of significant size with relation to itself. So that goes back to showing like the SEC will back into whatever is decided from above. They decide what is the most tenable situation. So the next question is does that mean that Coinbase is a regulated market of significant size? It depends how you look at it, right? So if you look at it on US dollar trading volume, Coinbase is the place, right? Not stable coins. If you look at US dollar, if you want to narrow it down to US dollar, if you want to narrow it down to US based exchanges, Coinbase is the market of significant size. So all of a sudden you're good. If you want to look at everything else, obviously you have to get Binance. The SEC is going after Binance in similar lawsuits, but of way more aggressive mentality. They're accusing them of way more egregious behavior than they're going after Coinbase for. They're going after Coinbase for operating an unregistered securities exchange or unregistered broker dealer, essentially. They are not doing that for Binance. They're going after them for way more. And also, as you hinted at, and I've said when we were at 50-50, I said they are not going after anything related to Bitcoin. Bitcoin's not even mentioned in the lawsuits. It's all these other tokens, those things that are more security-like tokens and not Bitcoin. So that was one thing. And then the Brian Armstrong article came out, which is one of the things that kind of made us go to 65%. They've since disputed it, but Brian Armstrong basically said to the FD that the SEC said to them, delist every single thing on your platform aside from Bitcoin. And in my mind, that just like says the SEC is more okay with Bitcoin, right? So if Coinbase has an SSA, as the SSA or surveillance sharing agreement partner in all these ETF applications, I think it's more safe to assume that the spot Bitcoin trading on Coinbase is more acceptable to the SEC than any of the other stuff.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So James, walk us through as though we're noobs here, because once again, you know about ETFs, soup to nuts, and you know about it from a TradFi standpoint. Let's say we get a bunch of ETFs approved, right? You got BlackRock, ARK Invest, and so forth. What are the next steps? What happens next internally? Do they start setting up the pipelines and they have to market it? And who do you think has the advantage? I'm assuming BlackRock, but you may, say different.
So I'm sure there's some I's that need to be dotted and T's that need to be crossed, but anyone who has filed probably has 95% of that stuff done, right? It's just a matter of finishing, tightening those nuts and bolts and figuring things out, right? So for the most part, they have their market makers. They're already aware. Market makers are the typical trading firms that help make sure these things trade efficiently. They have authorized participants, the people that create and redeem the shares. So an ETF, the reason it works so well is there's constant availability for creation and redemption, which you can't do in those trusts from Grayscale. And that's part of the reason why they're broken and why they want to convert to an ETF. You can constantly create shares or you can constantly destroy shares. Right. So that's the big problem. But for the most part, it's already a done deal, right? They're ready to go. All their pipes are connected. If they're not, then that's a huge problem for them and they're going to lose out, because once they get approved, if somebody else is ready, they're screwed, right? If somebody goes a couple days before and 6 ETFs launch on the same day, and then some of these other guys aren't actually ready to launch, somebody's losing their job probably, to be quite honest. So that's that front. So marketing, assuming these all do launch at one time, which Cathie Wood even hinted at on we interviewed her on ETF IQ, which is our ETF show for Bloomberg TV. And Cathie Wood, again, she keeps coming up in this conversation, but she just said marketing is going to be important. So people who have relationships, there's going to be people. BlackRock is the easy winner here. So many registered investment advisors, or RAAs in the US, independent advisors, trust BlackRock. They like using BlackRock. If they're not crypto native or crypto hardcore, they'll probably just go with the BlackRock option, assuming that gets approved first or right around the same time with the others. But there's plenty of other people out there, right? Some of these offerings are probably going to have really small redemption availability. So for the most part, to do that creation redemption process I talked about, you need hundreds of thousands of shares, 50,000 shares. So it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to create or redeem those shares. But there are ETFs out there for gold, for example, where you can only have a couple $1,000s and they'll deliver gold to your doorstep. So I think there will be issuers that will oh, you only need a few $1,000s and we'll send Bitcoin to whatever wallet address you want. Or some of them will lend out the Bitcoin and earn yield, so you'll have better returns and you'll get dividends from it, which obviously some people aren't going to want. They're going to want their stuff exposed, sitting in cold storage. So there's going to be nuances in how these people market their ideas, how they try to sell them. But likely right now, BlackRock would be the winner. But then again, you also have people like Valkyrie and Bitwise that are really focused solely on the crypto ecosystem. They have people from the DeFi space that really know DeFi and crypto in general. So maybe some of the people from the crypto world who are looking to put this thing in an IRA or 401k or what have you, they'll go with those type of providers. So this is one area where there really is specialized knowledge. So that's one benefit that ARK and 21 Shares have, because 21 Shares has a bunch of these ETFs launched in Europe already. So they have a lot of the back end infrastructure. I would never doubt BlackRock to figure it out, right? They are the largest asset manager in the world for a reason. They're very good at what they do, but there might be some nuances that, like, say, a 21 Shares has run into, and they are just know how to do it a little better. But who knows? But really, BlackRock is sitting in the pole position as far as like gathering the most assets, assuming they all launch at the same time just because of their brand name.
Yeah, for sure. So, James, we got this spot ETF thing happening, and everybody's hoping it dovetails with the Bitcoin halving coming up next year, going into the 4-year cycle, right? New all-time highs. What are your thoughts, man? Do you think we're in for some epic bull run like we've never seen before?
So I'm going to give some counter evidence to what we're talking about here, unfortunately.
Sure.
If you look at when the CME Bitcoin futures were approved, they were approved in late 2017, early 2018. So you can figure out what happened with Bitcoin price there if you know it was not a good sign. And then when Bitcoin futures ETFs were approved, it was in October of 2021 and very late October 2021, which coincided right around the peak of Bitcoin, around 69,000, and it's gone down from there. So these launches do tend to coincide, right, with like peaks, but we're in a very different, as you mentioned, we're not near those types of peaks. Those were after the halvings, things like that. And while we're in, I would argue, a bull market on crypto and Bitcoin specifically, we're not at the same like mania level that we were both times when CME futures were coming online and when Bitcoin futures ETFs were coming online. So that's the counter argument, right? These things also open the ability for easier shorting. The futures ETFs are very good trading vehicles, not necessarily something you might want to hold for a very long term due to rolling of futures, which I don't think we really need to get into, but I'm happy to if you want. The other side of this is you got to remember that Grayscale has a lot of Bitcoin, 3.3%, I think, of the global supply. So assuming this thing gets approved, right now, the main problem with GBTC is that you can't destroy those shares. And when I say destroy shares, you basically hand shares of the fund back and you get the underlying asset. So in traditional ETF, it's either equities or bonds. You give a basket of equities, you get it back. You give a basket of ETF shares, you get the basket of equities back. Or gold, you give the shares of the gold ETF, you get physical gold back, right? In this case, GBTC would convert at some point, and all that Bitcoin that's locked up could theoretically be unlocked and sold. But there's no way to know exactly what's going to happen. But there's a lot of, it's not as simple as these things are going to launch, it's a bull run automatically. I think it'll be determined by like what else is happening in the macro environment. But I think the one thing it does say, which I've hinted at before, is it's like maybe not regulatory clarity, but more like regulatory acceptance in a way, right? Like the SEC is kind of accepting that this is a thing. From my point of view, I've been arguing this since 2019, really. Like people know what Bitcoin is at this point. Like it's not like 2017 when people were trying to get these things out the door and the SEC was just not allowing it. I kind of understood it back then because a lot of people didn't know what they were doing. Even if Bitcoin goes to zero, like people putting money in a Bitcoin ETF, like they know what they're buying. You know what I mean? It's not like any sort of scary thing. There could be manipulation happening, but for the most part, people know what they're getting themselves into at this point. So I think it's definitely a positive indicator if these things approved. I would be crazy to argue the opposite, but I just want to point out those other avenues that like it's not as like, oh my God, this is automatically institutions are going to come running like a charging bull into this space. But it is a good thing, and our advisors who want to put their client assets in crypto will probably use those ETFs now. They love ETFs. This would put it on the traditional financial rails in the similar way that Grayscale trusts have, except in a way more efficient wrapper than what's currently available.
Yeah, it's a great point. And it's going to take time to ramp up and all these folks to get up to speed at the RIAs and so forth. But maybe it's more of the narrative, right? Like you're alluding to. It's just the fact, clarity. It was Spot ETF is approved. Who cares? Everybody's bullish now, right? If there's actual capital coming in, but everybody's bullish because of the signal, right? That this is good to go. So let's say Bitcoin ETF is approved, Bitcoin Spot ETF is approved. We're up and running. BlackRock, all these guys, Cathie Wood, they're all marketing, doing their thing. Now, bunch of players want to get ETH ETFs and other altcoin basket ETFs. And look, XRP, while that case was split, judge ruled Ripple, has a victory here, SEC has a victory here, but the main one was XRP intrinsically not being a security. So we could potentially see ETH and XRP ETFs being filed for. Do you expect that to be the next step after the Bitcoin spot ETFs have been approved?
Yeah, so we're up to like 11 Ethereum ETFs that have been Ethereum futures ETFs that have been applied for. And like that all happened within the last couple of weeks. And if you had asked me, like literally I'm on podcasts like a couple of weeks ago saying ETH futures ETFs aren't coming anytime soon, basically SEC. So I'm eating it in the face right now. But really that just signals like this is a complete 180 from the SEC. Essentially, we saw the 2x Bitcoin futures ETFs launch, and I was saying if the 2x Bitcoin futures ETFs launch and they don't allow spot Bitcoin ETFs, this is just absolutely ridiculous. Like you are not protecting investors, right? Like that was one theory. The same issuer that managed to get that through filed for an Ethereum futures ETFs. And I'll get to the Ripple stuff in a bit, but I'll just talk about the ETH stuff first, and then we'll get to remind me, and we'll go back to Ripple. Sure. This company, Volatility Shares, they launched the 2x Bitcoin futures. So I use that as a reason, like they have to approve spot. They can't allow this to launch, and they have to approve spot. They also filed for an Ethereum futures ETF on July 28th, Friday. And then the following Tuesday, everyone started filing. So we have had a bunch of filings last week, all the way through Friday night of last week, of all these issuers filing for Ethereum futures ETFs. And we were hearing early in the week is that the SEC basically went to those issuers and said, we're willing to take a look at Ethereum applications again. We don't know exactly what the wording is. Wall Street Journal confirmed this. Multiple crypto people confirmed. I believe Blockworks was the first one to say this. We were also hearing the same thing from people that we know in the industry that that's what had happened. And then Blockworks and everyone followed up, and I was like, yeah, we're hearing the same stuff. So I backed off of it, but I want to go back to why I was like so confident, or not super confident, but why I was so bearish on the ability to get ETH futures ETFs approved, even though I thought they should have been approved. But we had 5 filings in mid-May, and they were all forced to be withdrawn within a couple of days. So those 40 Act ETFs, I don't like specifically, there's 2 ways to file for an ETF. Since 2019, there was this new rule. Essentially, you file, and then within 75 days, you can launch unless the SEC tells you to withdraw. That's the new rule that's only for 1940 Act ETFs. Spot ETFs cannot follow that. They have to follow the old process. They are 1933 Act funds, which you don't need to get into details, but that's where you see the 240-day clock and all these different decision deadlines. These other process, the first Bitcoin futures ETFs, the Ethereum futures ETFs at this point are all 40 Act products, which means they have that 75-day clock. So usually the way it works is the SEC says, hey, withdraw that. Not happening. And that happened in May of this year. They were all withdrawn. So it showed us the SEC was just not willing to mess with Ethereum futures, which I disagreed with. Like from my point of view, once Bitcoin futures ETFs launch, I didn't understand the difference. Like they should allow Ethereum futures ETFs to launch too. But the SEC was a no-go, so I was wrong on that. But I think what happened here is Volatility Shares and these other issuers, they were like, you can't approve a futures ETF, and especially if Grayscale is going to win this lawsuit. So part of Grayscale's lawsuit is, as a regulator, and I've been saying this from the get-go, you can't approve futures ETFs, which are a derivative of spot market trading. Literally, the pricing of these futures ETFs and these futures themselves are based off the spot markets that the SEC is saying are manipulated. So I don't know how you can approve futures ETFs and not approve spot. So theoretically, one avenue that many people thought might happen is the SEC was going to force delist every Bitcoin futures ETF out there. And that way they wouldn't violate the court's orders if they lose to Grayscale. So I would make the same argument for Ethereum futures ETF. Like it would be arbitrary and capricious to argue, which are very specific legal terms. It would be capricious to argue that you can allow Bitcoin futures ETFs, but not Ethereum futures ETFs, which are both traded on the CME. Right. So I think at some point the SEC has done the calculus and been like, if somebody goes to court over this, we'll lose in the same way we might lose to Grayscale. So they were just like, all right, we might just have to let these go through. So we're at 75% chance odds that an Ethereum futures ETF gets approved in October. So the first date for that volatility shares one is October 11th, and the next are on October 16th, 17th, 18th, right around there. So we could see a slew of Ethereum futures ETFs launch in October, and a slew of spot Bitcoin ETFs launch sometime in this fall as well.
So James, it seems the pattern or the process here is the futures have to get approved first, then the spot. It seems like, or can that change in the future?
So that it shouldn't be the case, but it basically that's the way things have operated so far. So in theory, if these ETH futures ETFs do launch, absent some sort of move from the SEC, like you will get into Ripple now, but absent some sort of move from the SEC claiming Ethereum to be a security or some other reason why the SEC isn't going to allow spot Ethereum or these Ethereum futures ETFs. I mean, there's nothing saying the SEC is fine to tell people come and apply and then a few weeks later deny them. It'd just be very out of the ordinary. It would not be a normal move from them. It would be precedent breaking, essentially. So that's why we're so pro or positive on the fact that we think Ethereum futures ETFs are going to come alive.
Yeah.
And then ETH spot ETFs would come some point down the line, at least 240 days, if not more, from when somebody files for one of those ETH spot ETFs.
So let's talk about the Ripple ruling because of the implications on the other altcoins. Judge ruling secondary market sales are not securities and so on and so forth. What are your thoughts on that ruling? And could XRP still be an asset, given it has some level of clarity by law from the ruling, be approved for a futures ETF as well as spot ETF?
Yeah, I don't think that XRP is ever going to get through their the SEC's doors. Essentially, not anytime soon. Even after that loss, right? And I would call it a half loss because it kind of was a loss for Ripple and Ripple Labs, but a win for the broader crypto industry. Because I think what it really does, as far as I'm concerned, and I've talked to, we have a litigation analyst. I hinted that we have a team of people that look at this stuff. It's really a win for Coinbase and the crypto industry because it's like you can't just blanket call all of these things securities, right? Like you just can't do that. But then again, there's other judges that, like in the Terra case and stuff, that have like put down the Judge Torres's order in the Ripple case. There's a lot of nuance. Like some of the stuff in Judge Torres's case didn't even make sense to me, even as a pro crypto, pro digital asset guy. So there's some arguments to be had. It basically what it needs to happen, and we keep going back, we need clarity.
Yeah.
Congress needs to come in and issue laws. That said, I don't see the SEC really approving. First of all, CME would have to list XRP futures before a futures ETF would launch. And I can't imagine them allowing a spot Ripple ETF anytime soon. But again, like I said, 3 weeks ago, I said I didn't think Ethereum futures ETFs would be coming anytime soon unless there's a huge change in the SEC. So theoretically, there could be. But the SEC has said in that Terra case and multiple other cases that they believe Judge Torres got it wrong in many instances. But what I really think, like I'll just go back to what I said initially, it just kind of makes it so like the SEC just can't blanket call all these things securities. There's more nuance there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people were calling out Gary Gensler about that. And I noticed he updated some of his statements. He said without prejudging. So, yeah. But to your point, yeah, I could see that, they're probably so pissed off about the Ripple ruling that, XRP, any applications are not going to make it through just from, the whole organization there, and they're not going to be happy about that. So I want to also get your thoughts on, the two bills that are out there, Lummis Gillibrand, Patrick McHenry, and Glenn Thompson bills, which address a lot of what we were just talking about. Any thoughts on what might be the leader? I know the Patrick McHenry version was marked up in the House, some approvals, still has to go get, voted on the House floor. But what are your thoughts on these bills?
Yeah, so I have a colleague who's a regulatory analyst. So I talk about a litigation analyst. I talk about Mike McGlone, the macro side. Then we have somebody in Jamie Douglas Coots, who's on Twitter, who's our crypto analyst based in Australia. And then Nathan Dean's our regulations and law, and like congressional and all those things. So he covers what's going on in Congress very closely. He was more bullish that we get some sort of stablecoin bill potentially this year, seemed very skeptical that we'd actually get one of these crypto environment. What word did you use? What word did you use to describe these laws, these bills?
Crypt, I don't know. Crypto regulation?
Framework, I guess.
Oh,
Yeah,
framework. Yeah.
yeah, I guess framework would be the right word. He seemed to think they would be possible like next year. But I won't pretend to be like some super knowledgeable person on these, so I'll just like kind of defer to what he's saying.
Sure.
But basically the way that I'm gathering from talking to different people is like the pressure is ramping up from all different angles, and like there's a lot of things happening from Congress and the SEC that are just completely inflammatory, if you will. So I
Mm.
think they're going to have to be a little more nuanced in the way they handle things, not as hard lines. And I think the SEC has been trying to do things that they don't have the power to do. And they're just trying to force it through the courts and get power through court decisions. And really, they need to be given that power through Congress, as far as I'm concerned, and from things that I've read from people more knowledgeable than me.
Right.
We need these bills, or at least some version of these bills, or maybe a combination of these bills to get through both the House and the Senate before we get any sort of true regulatory clarity. But for the time being, on my front, I think the SEC just approving these Bitcoin and ETH futures ETFs would be providing a lot of regulatory. I don't know. I don't know if clarity is the right word, but it would be providing some regulatory clarity to any investors looking to invest in this
Mhm.
space or looking to hold this.
Yeah, and hopefully they could get something this year before the crazy election cycle next year. um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, all the Republican candidates are pro Bitcoin, right? So,
yeah.
and then you have RFK coming out here saying that he's pro Bitcoin as well. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know how much all of them are actually pro crypto and pro Bitcoin, but it's certainly at the point that the president, if you had talked to people in Bitcoin and crypto 7 years ago and found out that all the political and presidential candidates have to have a Bitcoin stance and opinion, they'd say it's a win for the industry. So time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, crypto is seeping into the mainstream pop culture, right? Politicians can't ignore it. Celebrities, it's just popping up, and I think that's a sign of adoption and growth. So it's very bullish, from a investing standpoint and adoption standpoint. I know we're almost up on time, so I'm going to ask you a couple more questions and we'll wrap it up. Any thoughts on the PayPal stablecoin that was launched yesterday on the Ethereum blockchain? It seems a huge validation of the real world application utility of blockchain and improving payments. And they did it on a permissionless blockchain, as in Ethereum, second, by market cap on the list. So I think that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, one, it just shows that like there is real interest from incumbent players in the TradFi space. This case, obviously, it's just a fintech company. So I think that's a positive aspect here. The other part of this is that's unique is like they went after Binance specifically, working with Paxos, and now Paxos is working with PayPal, and just kind of gives us a little more credence into like maybe what's going on from a higher level is they're pushing this more towards partners they trust. So away from Binance, maybe a little bit towards Coinbase via this SSA. So yes, they're suing Coinbase, but maybe I'm sure the SEC would much prefer everyone to be on Coinbase than Binance based on the lawsuits they filed and the claims they've made in that lawsuit. And this would also signify kind of like we'd rather like if all this crypto stuff is going to happen, we'd rather do with like regulated and people within our umbrella that we have oversight over, which some crypto cypherpunk people would definitely say is a bad thing. And I've seen it on Twitter, people calling it a bad thing. But I think it just shows that the SEC, again, and other regulators in this instance are kind of being forced to deal with what's actually happening on the ground. Yeah.
And WorldCoin, what are your thoughts on Sam Altman's project? You going to get your eyes scanned to get some WorldCoin tokens?
I actually just listened to a podcast with one of the founders of WorldCoin. I mean, I get the problem they're trying to solve, right? Like there are going to be a problem with lots of bots. But there's enough bots on Twitter as it is. As AI becomes better and better and better, there's going to be a million of them. So proof of human makes sense. I don't really have a strong opinion on the tokenomics or anything like that. It seems very sketchy to me, but I'm not an expert on it. I'm interested in it. Maybe they have figured out a way to do proof of person. But there's obviously people a lot smarter than me criticizing the hell out of them, and there's obviously people a lot smarter than me working on WorldCoin's behalf. So I'm kind of just in a wait and see type mode, but it's super interesting, I guess, is my view here. But I'm not somebody I would trust their opinion or say I have a better understanding than anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, I absolutely understand the problem they're trying to solve, and you know, some of the things they mentioned, UBI and so forth. These are problems that are going to come up in the economy and the world. But the orb is dystopian, man.
It's cool to look at. Like, part of me just wants to see one, but maybe my iris would get scanned even without my acceptance or approval.
Sure.
But yeah, I would love to see one in person. So that's where I'm at right now. But again, like, the other part of it is like, this is going to sound bad to crypto server funks, but like, I already have all of my data everywhere. Like, I'm on a bunch of social media platforms. I have like accepted all this stuff. Like, I've kind of accepted the fact that I know a lot of people would be mad at me for saying this, but like, I'm at the point where like it's already gone. Like, people have access to me no matter what, as it is. So
it's true.
Yeah, I'm not as worried about it as many other people, which I know plenty of people in the crypto and specifically Bitcoin want your own sovereign currency,
right?
Own it yourself, stuff like that. So yeah, I'm not as concerned as most people, but I am definitely taking it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I'm of the same mindset. I know that, look, the Bitcoin hardcore maximalists, they have that religious fervor. Anything they want to hammer hit it with a hammer, right? But look, at the end of the day, the government has your thumbprint and everything about you. Facebook, Instagram, everything has some level of information about you. They already have data mined it, so they retarget you for ads and everything. You know.
Yeah, if it helps me get more targeted ads, I'm all for it. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. And also those Bitcoin maxis, obviously they're very good for like maintaining the status quo of the Bitcoin ecosystem. Some of them are a little aggressive in my opinion, but like they're a valuable add to the ecosystem as far as I'm concerned. I just am not one of those people personally.
Yeah. All right, James, wrap up questions. If you could create your own metaverse, where would you go to? What would it be about?
You sent me these questions beforehand, and I was like, I need to think about that one, and I completely forgot to think about that one. I have no idea. I got nothing. I know nothing about the metaverse aside from Mark Zuckerberg has bet his life on it.
And losing billions every quarter. Rapid fire questions. Favorite food?
Buffalo wings.
Favorite musician or band?
Or steak. I should go to a ribeye steak. Red Hot Chili Peppers. Oh no, Billy Joel. I'll go Billy Joel.
Of course,
yeah, I'm a little young. I'm
a
little young for that, but I love Billy Joel.
Oh, me too, man. Like, look, I'm not the demographic that fits Billy Joel fans, but Billy Joel. Look, I play guitar. I'm into music, and I'm like, Billy Joel's good, man. I could listen to him all day.
Yeah.
Favorite movie?
Shawshank Redemption.
I just watched that the other day. It's a good movie. Favorite book?
So I love like the Wheel of Time and fantasy type series, but for this, I'll also say I'm going to give two options here that like are more related to crypto. Billion Dollar Whale, which is about the 1MDB scandal. Basically, this guy stole billions of dollars from Malaysia. And just the fraud that was able to continue going. The story reads like fiction. And same with Bad Blood, which is about Elizabeth Holmes. Those are two stories that I've read in the last like 6-7 years, whatever it is. And like I keep seeing fraud like all over the place in crypto. And just reading those, it's just amazing how people can get sucked in into what's going on. And like I always kind of like I'm super bullish on these things. Like recently, I'm like obsessed with the LK99 superconductor stuff all over the internet, and I can't get enough of it. But I'm like, I go back and I think about these people who committed fraud and just lied to people for years and years and years and got away with it. So like, I always go back to it and think about like what could be the alternative benefit here, and are they actually doing what they say they're doing? Look for those signs that were there for Joe Low and 1MDB and Elizabeth Holmes and in Bad Blood. So those two books have like really changed the way I look at things. And particularly in relation to crypto, as I'm sure you're aware,
Of
with all
course.
the frauds we've seen with Celsius, FTX, or I guess I should say alleged frauds, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Human psychology, right? Never fails. It's just a different scheme, a different structure, different company, different name, but human psychology still remains the same. We're still human as we move forward and we get fooled. And when you're not working at Bloomberg, what are you doing for fun as a hobby?
I'm an endurance runner. So I'm a runner, but I like endurance sports in general, biking, running, anything like that. And soccer. I played soccer most of my life, so I'm a big soccer player. Don't do that as much anymore, but yeah, running and endurance type events are really my go-to. I did it in college and I'm a shell of my former self, but I still enjoy doing it once in a while.
James, pleasure chatting with you, my friend. I'll have to have you back on as we get to the ninth inning on these spot ETF approvals, and we'll talk more about that. But thank you for joining me.
Yeah, so we're both in Jersey. Maybe we'll do that one in person.
For
I
sure.
look forward to it.